And welcome to the Jimmy Daytona Show. Today I have got my friend Dana Bullister, who lists Florence Nightingale as one of her most influential figures. I remember meeting her at my friend Chris Lauderdale's party, and she was holding court with me and my friends about her. So I definitely wanted to interview her and find out more about why she admires Florence Nightingale. As many of you know, she's the founder of modern nursing, did a lot of groundbreaking work in the Crimean War, and I'd love to hear more of what my friend Dana has to say about Miss Nightingale. And go to town.
About Florence Nightingale, absolutely. So I'm thrilled that I have the unique opportunity to talk about one of my inspirations in life. I know many people, when they're asked about folks who they look up to or who inspire them, either who live today or in history, or who don't exist, they're just, say, characters from somewhere. They might say superheroes like Iron Man or different figures from history. I honestly think that Florence Nightingale surpasses so many of these folks. And of course, that's an opinion, but I think it's an opinion based on the fact that many people don't know the full story of who this person actually was, what she really did in our world back a little while ago. But yeah, she's one of the people I look up to, and the reason is because of her story. And she was this woman who was born in the Victorian era. She was born in Florence, Italy, which is why she's named Florence. But she was British, and she was raised in Great Britain. And she was born to parents who had very both feminist and liberal leanings, especially when it came to how women should be educated. And this would play into how she grew up and how she was educated. And so she was taught by her father, and she decided that when she came of age, she was in her teens, 20s, etc., she would not follow the traditional path of a Victorian woman, which, as you might expect, was very limited, especially in her class. So she was this person who was born into a very wealthy or at least very substantially wealthy and very well-connected British family. Right. So this is who she was. This is how she was born. One of these things that no one can control, but she's fortunate to be born in that circumstance. Anyway, she came of age. She decided she would not follow the expectation for someone of her gender and class. And instead of basically being a mother and wife, she would devote herself to helping the rest of humanity. And she had many inspiring experiences. She was fortunate to be able to travel all over Europe, travel to Greece, travel to Egypt, all of these places which helped to inspire her to this mission, right? Anyway, another thing people don't really know about Florence Nightingale is that she was a really smart statistician. She was a statistics nerd, right? People don't know that. They know her for nursing and everything, but she was brilliant. And so she, as I mentioned, was taught by her father in things like history, math, all sorts of different fields. And anyway, she stood out both for her more academic interests, but also because she was a total stats nerd. And if people ask if that inspires me, all right, it does. I mean, it's cool, right? Like, come on. Anyway, so she let's see. So she decided she would help humanity. She kind of thought through how she might do that. And she made all sorts of connections, all sorts of relationships with all of these folks through her family, through her travels, etc., many of whom were politicians or policymakers. She ended up hearing about these opportunities to help out in the Crimean War, to improve the conditions that soldiers experienced while they were not in battle. They were, say, wounded, and they were being treated. And so she went to help out with this. And she figured out pretty quickly that most of these soldiers were dying, not because of the war or fighting or their wounds, but because of their really poor conditions at these camps or these hospitals where they were treated. And they had incredibly bad sanitation, incredibly bad ventilation, incredibly bad drainage with regard to sewers and everything. And she figured out, yeah, most of the deaths resulted from really bad conditions, disease, right? Anyway, she ended up doing a lot of work. She used her, so she was actually called the Lady with the Lamp because she spent a lot of her time throughout her life going to these wounded soldiers camps and basically staying up through the night carrying this lamp and caring for these wounded soldiers. And again, these were camps in the midst of war, right? This lady, this privileged Victorian lady, didn't need to do any of this stuff, right? But she did. And it made an impact well beyond anyone could have ever expected. She was both caring, but was also quite perceptive, right? So she was also quite well connected. So once she found out that this Crimean War camp was this wounded soldiers camp during the Crimean War was essentially kind of killing its own soldiers due to its poor conditions, she used her political connections to lobby and ask, and intermediate connections too. I think she sent a request to improve, to allocate some more funding to an improved camp that would actually have sanitary conditions. Anyway, so it was said, and this is kind of controversial, questionable, but it was said that the new camp improved, basically reduced the mortality rate from something like 42% to 2%. It was just insanity. So this all plays into her work after the wars and the wounded soldiers camp, because it turns out that there were a lot of lives during times of peace, or in areas that were in times of peace, that were needlessly lost due to poor sanitation, poor ventilation, poor sewer systems, bad drainage, things that were collectible, that were correctable at a personal as well as a policy level, right? And so again, she used her statistical and communication skills. She was also quite charismatic, as I understand. She was quite attractive as this young woman, and she was also very great at communicating what needed to be done in a way that was compelling to policymakers. And so she did a lot of lobbying, and the types of lobbying that she did as a well-connected person was she would construct these entirely novel ways of communicating what was needed in this time of war, right? She actually invented a new form of data visualization that's now called the Nightingale Rose diagram, also called a polar area diagram, in order to communicate that most of the soldiers that died in these wounded soldiers camps were actually deaths due to disease rather than deaths due to battle, right? Anyway, so invented new forms of data visualization, managed to use her political connections for these amazing pro-humanity types of uses, and managed to incredibly improve the health and save innumerable lives in these camps, but also across society in Great Britain and eventually in India, right? Which was, of course, a colony of Great Britain. So she, in times of peace, she lobbied the British government to enforce policies that required better sanitation infrastructure for private residences, for landowners, right? And this increased hygiene, sanitation a lot, and saved prevented a lot of disease. So that was crazy. And then she also managed to invent the entire profession of modern nursing, and was its leader. In fact, every person who is trained to become a nurse to this day has to give something called the Nightingale Pledge in order to formally become a nurse. And that's because of her work. And what she did is she'd actually train legions of nurses to serve people, to implement these methods of better hygiene, better sanitation, so that the entire field was basically revolutionized because of her. She taught some folks in Great Britain. Her teachings eventually spread to the US, right? And she essentially scaled up all of these practices. And she also helped out and scaled these practices to India. And a lot of her work helped to increase the lifespan, the average lifespan of humans in India within just a few decades by 20 years, okay? As in, the average lifespan of people living in India was increased by 20 years, not all due to her, but by a lot of her work impacted this actually happening. And this was not due to an increased, say, technology. This was due to increased practices of the sort that she was pushing. That's mind-blowing. For one human being to help make that type of impact, I mean, that's just incredible. Anyway, this one biographer that was that was successful, well known at the time, and I cannot remember his name right now. I can look him up. But this biographer at the time was known for profiling a lot of these so-called heroes of the Victorian era who claimed to be doing so much good stuff, right? And he'd kind of take them down and he'd kind of show who they really are, because he was kind of the cynical guy, I guess. Anyway, so he had done that a lot, and he kind of got whiff of some of Florence Nightingale and her pursuits. And so he decided he would see for himself to see if this woman was the real deal, right? And so he ended up looking more into Nightingale's pursuits. He might have actually met her at some point, but he looked into a lot of the work that she did. And after some research and real world looking into just the stats behind what she was doing, he concluded that, yeah, she's a badass. Okay.
British badass.
A British badass. And so he ended up publishing a work of profile, kind of biography, I believe, of her, which kind of sealed her fame. She was pretty well known at this point because she was kind of the founder of modern nursing, right? Anyway, so the other impressive thing that she was known for was not only was she skilled in math and statistics, she was also, as I mentioned, a really good communicator. She was great at lobbying politicians. She used she pulled every stop of her connections, of everything, right, in order to get stuff done. But she was just honestly a great writer. She was great at speaking, and specifically, she was great at speaking and writing for all types of audiences, not just the typical high-class, sophisticated Victorian intellectual, right? She also did a lot of writing that catered to folks whose literacy might not necessarily be that high. They might not be from any type of high class at all. And she used more simple simpler English, right? And she ended up writing a lot of texts that outlined simple ways that people could implement better sanitation, better hygiene practices in their own lives, and therefore take their own health more effectively in their own hands, and really take control of their lives, their ability to survive all of the all of the barriers, all of the diseases, all of the all of the hardships that they had to deal with. And she would develop these texts specifically to be accessible to everybody, across Britain, across the world, right? So that people could be empowered to actually follow the stuff that she advocated for. So again, she added so much, not just by inventing the entire field of nursing or implementing these scalable policies that managed to increase the lifespan of huge swaths of humanity, but she empowered at the individual level. Every class, she wasn't this person who looked down on folks from a different background at all, right? She would care for everybody, every type of wounded soldier. That's what she was known for. She talked to everybody, right to everybody. And she helped empower people of all backgrounds to take control of their own lives in that way, their own health, and improve not just their own health, but spread of disease, which is ultimately, of course, a social issue, and ultimately why she had such a big impact as one person. So I think I covered the main points of why this woman is inspiring. I think that she encapsulates so many values that I really look up to. She wasn't just smart, or she wasn't just caring, or she wasn't just willing to use whatever background fate managed to deliver to her at birth, right? To get the most done. She clearly genuinely wanted to help humanity. We were talking about this a bit before, but through her actions, some people, through her actions, and I noticed this in other people too, but you can kind of just tell if a human being has genuine affection for other people, it genuinely cares about other people, right? This woman who didn't need to do anything, she could have just sat there her whole life, living in this privileged environment, being around interesting, privileged people. She didn't need to do any of this. She didn't need to go into war zones or care for wounded soldiers, but she did, right? And why? It's because I think that she really had this affection for other people. And that, I think, drives home what I hope to do, right? I hope to have the same philosophy and the same attitude, at least a little bit. If I can have a modicum of the type of drive that she had in her pursuits, that's all I really want, right? What an impressive person. I hope by giving this rundown that more people have a fuller understanding of who this person was and why she mattered and why she's both relatable but impressive. Not enough people know about this person. And if you want to choose someone to look up to, you could do a lot worse.
She's literally a godsend, helping people live 20 years, cutting the mortality rate like from 42 to 2% overnight. I read that she's literally called from God every few years or so to do this task, do this other task. Could you elaborate on, some of those times in her life?
Yeah, well, there were certain moments in her life where she was inspired. She did a lot of traveling. And there were certain moments in her travels where she said that, yeah, she felt a calling. She was inspired in a way that made her believe that her role on this earth was to serve other people. And there were certain moments of inspiration that she described. She was very interesting in the sense that she definitely personalized her own philosophy. It was unique to her, according to folks who knew of her and her own writings. And she was unique in that, yeah, she definitely had a philosophy, but she made it her own. As I mentioned, she treated everybody. It didn't matter their class. It didn't even matter their profession. She would treat prostitutes. And when people would comment on that, she just said, look, I'm helping people. That's my role here. I'm helping a person. That's my role, right? Or at least that's what she communicated. So anyway, she definitely thought for herself and embraced a system of beliefs that really worked for her.
And I read that she might be an inspiration for medical tourism. Or, she looked up to spas in the Ottoman Empire where people get healthy and get healed, from their time in the Army. Sometimes you see medical tourism. It is people doing last-ditch cancer treatments in Mexico. People to Eastern Europe because some of the medical treatments are a lot cheaper. But what were some of the things that she did in terms of making sure people are healthy even if they have to travel for it?
Sure, yeah. She did help to popularize medical tourism. And that was one of the ways that she kind of used her platform, so to speak, to bring that on the radar of people as a possibility, right? As we know today, sometimes it's cheaper to travel to a different location to get treatment for certain things than it is to receive treatment wherever you are, right? So she kind of helped bring that to people's awareness. I honestly don't know that many more of the details about that, but that was one of the things that she did. And it's equally important in a sense, because again, some treatments, depending on where you live, are not accessible to certain people. And that's a tragedy. I think few people would disagree with that, and helping to bring to people's awareness that other possibilities are on the table. That's a contribution. So just another thing to add to the list of remarkable achievements this person accomplished.
I read she even had her own pet owl named Athena that she came across. It's pretty random.
It is pretty random, but pretty enduring. Apparently, when she was traveling, she rescued this little baby owl that a bunch of kids were tormenting. So she rescued this owl and kept it around for a little bit during her travels, and nursed the owl back to health and kept it as a pet for a little while. So I think that how a person, the random little things that people might do in private are often quite illuminating as to their character. And so this is one of them, very endearing. And if I found a baby owl, I mean, why not take it in as a pet? That sounds awesome. But yeah, this is another thing, another
if you
story.
stumble across a baby owl, it probably ain't going to be a coincidence.
Oh, exactly. It will be destiny telling me that this is my baby owl. Well, first I would have to do a little bit of Googling to make sure, it didn't have rabies or something. I don't know much about baby owls, to be perfectly honest. I want to make sure that I wasn't like destroying the owl or something. I don't know about the care and feeding. Anyway, I'll stop there. But overall, I would be a fan of taking in a baby owl.
Yeah, I remember. I read that when she increased life expectancy by 20 years, there are a few ways she could have gone about it by, improving drainage, improving sanitation, requiring houses to take care of that. Um, she and her advisors made a conscious choice instead of like having medical technocrats, unless they've been around top down, to get the local communities buy-in, to devolve it, to the local level to make sure it was successful. Could you elaborate on how she was successful taking that tack to vastly improve the sanitation, people of England and India?
Yeah, totally. So again, this is why it's so crazy how many different skills this person has. So again, not only was there the statistics and the communication and the smarts, charisma, etc., but this person, Florence Nightingale, was a policy whiz. What she realized is that a lot of the changes that needed to be made in British society and across its colonies in order to implement better drainage, for example, as a matter of sanitation, that it would be better handled at the local level rather than enforced from the top by, say, the national government of Great Britain, right? And so she realized, just from a practical perspective, it would be better enforced at the local level. And so she lobbied to make these types of regulations enforceable, right, at that level. Or she helped that be the case, right? She made it easier to have these be enforceable at the local as opposed to the national level. So this is another thing that she managed to achieve. So, feet right on the ground right there.
Yeah, she was very successful because she was well connected to a lot of people in the public eye who were like some of the people that either encouraged her or partnered with her to have these vast successes in terms of keeping people healthy, helping people feel good.
Yeah. So she had a lot of connections, especially in the political arena. As I mentioned, she did come from a pretty well-connected, well-off family. And for this reason, in addition to her travels, various experiences, she did manage to meet a lot of high up political figures who ended up being quite instrumental in implementing her recommendations, her policy recommendations, right? And I don't, I can't spin off the exact names of all of these, but I know one was I believe the Secretary of War during the Crimean War. And there were a bunch of other politicians, as well as various, there was one close friend that she had named Mary Clark, I believe, who ended up helping her out a lot in her various nursing initiatives, who ended up being a great advisor. And so she was actually an advisor of different politicians as well. So, yeah.
Wow. To close the circle, I mean, how did she like come across your radar screen to begin with? I mean, she's like a well-known name for everybody, but how did you come across her and dig in deep, when you did something? Like what happened in your own life? How else is she inspiring you to this day?
Sure. So you might ask, not many people know this much about Florence Nightingale. Why do you do? Why do you? Right? What inspired you to actually look into this person? And it wasn't for a school assignment or anything like that. It was actually after I went to college, graduated. I was working somewhere, I think, and it might have been still in college. But in any case, it was during this time in my life when I was having a little bit of an internal crisis, you might say. And it was kind of the upshot of everything that had happened in my life prior to then. And I'm sure many folks can relate here, but I was studying cognitive science, and it must have been while I was in college, and I just kept seeing a lot of general media having nothing to do with research that kept kind of suggesting to me that perhaps women are not just inherently physically weaker than men. Perhaps women are intellectually weaker than men. Perhaps it's less possible for a woman to rank in the top 1% to 2% of badass statisticians or mathematicians. Perhaps that's the case. And it made me think. And about my own life and my own potential. Yeah, it wasn't great. I'll tell a little story. It'll sound like I'm full of myself or something, probably, but I'm not telling it for that reason, hopefully. But but I was going to stay here in my lovely home of Cambridge, Massachusetts for college at MIT, right? I was admitted there and I didn't go. And the reason is because I was told that perhaps it would be too much for me. Perhaps I shouldn't study what I wanted to study at the time, which I did, computer science. It would be too hard. It would be too much for me. And it's sad in the sense that I consider myself a fairly independent thinker, right? You know, screw the BS. These people telling you things. Anyway, it's different when someone who's close to you, who has your best interests at heart, tells you something like that. Or you think that. Anyway, this impacted me, I guess. I didn't go. And that was why. I thought it was too hard for me. I thought maybe I wasn't smart enough. And I think some of these beliefs kind of fed into that decision. You know, I wasn't confident enough. People talk about, oh, you know, women should be confident. Well, that's great. But when you tell them things like that, what do you really expect? Okay. Anyway, I'm over that now. Whatever. That was a phase of my life. And I was in this general mode where I wasn't sure. I was seriously pondering. I was like, well, are women intrinsically less intellectually strong than men? Maybe. I don't know. Are women more emotional? Are they not capable of logic as much as men are? And I was trying to reconcile this in my own brain. That's a really bad thing to do, because eventually you come to the conclusion that, look, if that were really the case, I would not be able to reconcile this in my brain, since I would not be capable of thinking logically. Anyway, it's very irreconcilable if you think about it. Eventually, I had to sort of pull myself out of this kind of state of minor depression, to be honest. And the way I did that is I sort of self-therapized, to use a term that definitely doesn't exist. But what I did was I decided that for a couple months or so, I would ensure that every single day I would go on Wikipedia and I would read an article about some famous woman who did something cool, right? Anyway, I ended up reading quite a lot of Wikipedia articles about quite a lot of crazy, impressive human beings. I mean, let alone women. I mean, these people. Try it for yourself. You will realize that for your entire life, you've only scratched the surface of what certain people have managed to achieve. My goodness, it opened my eyes in a way, but Florence Nightingale was one of these Wikipedia articles, and I was floored by it. I'd never known that it was possible. You can tell it speaks to me, right? I'd never known it was possible to be someone who was, you know, born as a woman, to have every reason to think that they didn't belong in certain fields or whatnot. But instead of just, you know, laying back and doing what people expected, you just invent your own freaking field. She invented modern nursing. I mean, it floored me, I guess, but it also floored me reading all the other articles. And yeah, intellectually, it was a great exercise. I managed to gain a lot of knowledge about a lot of impressive people, but I think something deeper happened. I guess when you're growing up here, at least, you know, in the US, looking at US movies, US media, etc., you end up getting exposed to a lot of everything, showing a certain image of most women. And this is not new. This has been talked about a lot. But the thing is, you might disagree with that image, but just being exposed to all of these stories, story after story after story after story, with in multimedia color, right? It affects you over time. And I was kind of, in my own little way, counteracting that. I was kind of exposing my brain to all of these examples of people who I wanted to internalize a bit more than the people that were being presented to me by default. And so at a deeper level, I think it affected me. And to this day, I no longer believe that sex has anything to do, you know, sex, gender, whatever, has anything to do with, you know, your intellectual, your life capacity. I mean, I don't believe that. And it's not like I don't believe that in my head. I don't believe that emotionally either. There's nothing that would kind of bias me, I don't think, in that direction. And I'm now predisposed to see the real badassery that exists all around us in this world. Men, women, kids, adults, you name it. It's important to open your eyes. And I think that exercise helped me to open my eyes. So that's how I ended up stumbling upon Florence Nightingale. And if you choose to do this exercise for yourself, you'll realize that she's just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many incredible humans out there. And I think knowing about them is important for us personally and for our culture.
Wow. I'm so happy that she helped you heal, that she helped you inspire, and that she, helped you tap into, the intellectual, personal brilliance that you bring to the table. Thanks so much for sharing Florence's story on the Jamie Daytona Show. And, may Florence's memory be eternal and inspiration to you all. Thank you very much for tuning in.